Antisocial behavior orders are at best achieving nothing, at worst making the society in which we live in much more worse, because we say it rejects the very principles of criminal justice. Ever so proud to propose. 3 things I'll do in my speech. First, on some framing. Second, forwarding our 2 arguments from proposition bench. First, on how it achieves no retribution, and second, the effects on other sectors of the criminal justice system. First, on framing then. Okay, so what does its antisocial behavior look like when it's actually put in like society? We say they're going to be relatively doing like a short time, because it's not going to be as much of a serious offense as like actual murders or actual like hate, like actual like crimes where you go out and put like violence in the world. And second, what does the CJS, what does criminal justice effectively aim to do? We say this on 3 layers. First, they have to they have to actually like protect individuals, and especially victims, because we say that victims are the most vulnerable stakeholder, because they've already gone through like a lot of oppression, and they've already gone through like a lot of like violence in the first place. So as CJS, we're aiming to protect them. Second, we're preventing reoffenses in these actual like criminals, and this if we were to consider like antisocial behavior orders, we will then like show in our arguments how this is not going to be likely. And third, we're just overall trying to serve justice to these victims and overall create a society where we can avoid these antisocial behaviors stuff happening. First, then, arguments on reoffenses. We say that these antisocial behaviors, such as like racist behavior, like sexist behavior, or just like hate crime in general, they work best in like if they're grouped together when they're in teams. Why is this? First layer, not everyone are bad actors. We say that these bad actors are like people who do bad things, and they're not really necessarily all together. We don't really want to paint the world as everyone is just like a bad actor, everyone's doing hate crimes. So we say that they're more dispersed. If then they are going to like be in like the same area, i.e. prison in this case, we say if they're grouped together, it's going to be so much worse in that there's going to be a concentrated ideology in like believing in these racist behaviors and like sexist behaviors. Second, on punishment, we say these antisocial people who are like racist and sexist, they have such a keen ideology in believing in those ideologies, and they'll insofar as they're actively like going out to society to like say these hate crimes, and insofar they're like trying to like make other people actively feel bad, this ideology is going to be very keen. We say that they don't really have an incentive to change their ideology in the first place, and we say that like this retribution we serve on the criminal justice system and these antisocial behavior orders is going to achieve nothing. We say like other crimes such as like stealing, there can be an inherent reason why you steal, just because like hey, maybe I don't have enough money, and maybe I need like enough money to like feed my kids. There is a certain like good incentive to do this, whereas like these crimes that involve antisocial behavior orders, we say there's no inherent reason and any justification to do this. Insofar that is true, we say there isn't really inherent like incentive for them to like change their mind. Okay. So and adding on to that, we say, as I explained to you before, this like the time that they're going to be serving is relatively short, which like maybe give them like 2 years, and this also is going to be dependent on like how much of like a serious crime if they've done. We say this behavior is not going to change in those like short times, and we say this is how we mechanize how this is going to get worse. We say on third layer on reoffenses, there's going to be an uprising in people who are antisocial in the first place. As I mentioned beforehand, we say because these people are then groups, and because we also tell you that there's going to be a larger mass in people who are like being antisocial in these prisons. The reason for this is there's just going to be a lot more people who are just like antisocial rather than like people who are like stealing, because there's just more people who would rather like do that than like commit like crimes and commit like violence wherever. And because now there's like proportional like large mass of these people who are having these same ideologies as say, hey, like, oh, being sexist is good, hey, being racist is good, like I support this. Insofar that is true, that's going to create much more of like a tension in these people where they're grouping together, where they're feeling the same ideologies, like, hey, I didn't do any wrong, why are we here? The impacts of this is now that they're going to be able to form bonds together. As I mentioned before, this is what like creates like the strong bond, creates like the much more like a strongest team for them, which more than makes their ideology much more stronger. This means that they're going to be constantly engaging like more antisocial behaviors in prisons. They're going to strengthen this like ideology together. And second, if they do get out, which I mentioned to you is going to be like relatively fast, we say that first of all, they're not going to get enough retribution and punishments, because the whole point of CJS is like to give them in the reciprocal punishment and reciprocal punishments, because they're not actively feeling like, hey, I did something wrong, because we tell you that this ideology is going to strengthen in the future. In the best case, it doesn't really solve anything at a principle level. In the worst case, they're going to be continuing to be antisocial and even worse. And this time with ties with other people who are in prison that they like made friends with in prison that have the same ideology as them. This is very bad for the victims, as because it feels like everyone's just against them now, because there's a certain larger mass of people who are actively against these victims, which is what we as proposition don't want to do. So because of large mass and no punishment, it makes the system worse. Now then, on second argument on effects on victims, I've already told you that there's going to be overcrowding in prisons of like these antisocial people. We say because of this, first, they're going to be, and these people are going to more end up in jails. And second, there's going to be more trials based on these people. And because CJS inherently has unlimited resources, this looks like time. This looks like the ability to like facilitate and like look around neighborhoods. This looks like giving trials. All this is going to go through minor trials, because we tell you that there's going to be much more like cases related to like these antisocial things now. It's because they're just simply more common. And insofar as we allow them to like actually go to prison, it's going to get so much worse, because now the victims who are actively looking for justice, who are actively like looking for much more major like trials, and if we focus on more of these minor trials, we say like their issues are going to go under, although there are going to be like at least prioritized a little bit. I think it's very unfair for these victims who are like even like vulnerable in the first place to get like less justice and less like resources for them to like actually go ahead and like get the justice that they want and not suffer furthermore. We say this rejects the very principle of criminal justice, and for all those reasons above, I'm very so proud to propose.
To begin with, while ABSOs, which is known as antisocial orders, behavior orders, may have their flaws, abolishing them together will create more issues than it actually solves, leaving communities vulnerable and law enforcement with fewer tools and that can tackle non-criminal yet destructive actions. So today, I'll have four main parts to my speech. The first with the debate setup, moving on to my arguments, and then comparisons, and then I'll finally end with my rebuttals. To begin with our debate setup, we believe that the burden of this debate is what is best for society, and therefore we need to prove that not abolishing antisocial behavior orders is the best for society and benefits the most amount of people. So I would like to start with definition of some words. For example, the first being antisocial behavior orders. To begin with, these are only civil penalties and not criminal charges. These are only like minor civil penalties and will most likely not send you into jail unless in extreme cases. Now, moving on to a criminal case. A criminal is basically you're going against the law. For example, theft, vandalism, murder. These are criminal cases and must be treated with extreme intention. So, moving on to my argument. My first argument being that this is a fundamental tool to combat antisocial behavior. To begin with, this is a necessary legal tool to help it manage and mitigate the effects of antisocial behavior. And that these tools, this order allows law enforcement to address antisocial behavior and we can see immediate reductions in antisocial behaviors. And moving on, this also has a lot of public support. There's definitely considerable support behind antisocial behavior, as it is a reassurance to community safety and make people feel more safe and feel more involved into this community. And by keeping this antisocial behavior order, people will feel more safe, and that this will increase community cohesion and lead to a net benefit. And moving on, this is also a deterrence to antisocial behavior. This is like any law, it acts like a deterrence, making people know that their actions have consequences and lead to an immediate decline in antisocial behavior and overall improving community safety. Now, Before I continue, is there any POIs? Yes,
Yeah.
continue.
So why do you think there's going to be deterrence if antisocial behavior is something that is uncontrollable?
Oh, we to begin with, we haven't stated that antisocial behavior is uncontrollable. Any behavior can be controlled by you, if it's in the correct environment. For example, you may think that, oh, I suddenly I swear all the time. Well, you can control that by making yourself like having specific rules for yourself, by controlling yourself, by making the logic, the rational part of your mind come forward and control yourself. And therefore, like any law, any like crime and theft, it's all controllable, and this is a deterrence, and it will act like a deterrence and stop people from committing further antisocial behaviors. So to compare, in our world, by having this antisocial behavior order, antisocial behavior will go down. However, in the government benches world, the only way to help with this is either they have to remove the entire antisocial behavior order altogether, which is what the motion says, abolish. And then by doing that, the only way that they can stop antisocial behavior is pressing criminal charges. And criminal charges are a major charge. They send you to jail, they leave a mark on your criminal record, and it's overall a very big step towards a minor inconvenience. And moving on to my rebuttals. Our opponents have stated multiple points. For example, one of their major points being that people grouped together that people concentrated together can lead to more extreme ideologies. However, this is wrong, as they fail to recognize the definition of antisocial behavior orders. For example, only in extreme cases they go to prison. Most of the time, an antisocial behavior order might be curfew, might be restricting you to go to specific locations, might be restricting you to go outside your home. These do not incentivize people to group together and to form extreme ideologies. And if they do, for example, if they do extreme cases and they go to prison will act like normal. Because if you think about it, any normal criminal charges send people to prison. People who do theft, people who murder people, they all get grouped together in prison. Why doesn't that incentivize people to murder more? Why doesn't that incentivize people to do theft more? That's because prison, the whole reason for prison is to rehabilitate and to change people. And therefore, that is why just by simply putting people into prison, that doesn't mean they're going to concentrate and make their ideologies great. It's just going to rehabilitate people and actually have a more positive impact rather than a negative concentrated impact. And that our opponents have also stated that there's no reason or justification to do antisocial behavior. And that is exactly why we need to stop this. There is no reason for you to do antisocial behavior. That means that this will most likely resolve in an intuition, and that this is the most terrible thing that you can have. People instinctively thinking that racism is good, people instinctively thinking that sexism is good. That is exactly why we need to stop this. That is exactly why we need antisocial behavior orders to stop this from going forward. And moving on, our opponents have also stated that by having antisocial orders, we may have crowded prisons, and prison might be overcrowded. However, this is important to keep in mind that right now there is already antisocial behavior orders. And do we see crowded prison? I don't think so. We already have antisocial behaviors going around. People are enforcing this law of, this order of antisocial behavior, and I do not see any overcrowded prison. We do not see overcrowded prison. We do not see concentrated ideology. We do not see people going against. As a matter of fact, we see a lot of public support for going against this. And therefore, that is why we think we should not abolish antisocial behavior orders, and that there's a lot more benefit in that not abolishing antisocial behavior has the best impact for society, and therefore that is why we're more proud to oppose.
A world where society can develop and progress is the world that we want. So proud to propose, right? So let me start off with some refutations to the opposition side. They try to come up here and, okay, before I even move on to the refutations, let me do a point of clarification here, right? The violation of these laws will land you in jail, right? It might be 3 months, it might be like a year, but it will land you in jail in most cases. Because A, if it didn't, then there's no point of these laws, right? And B, they do, right? Because that's like in society, that's what happens, right? Okay, moving on. They try to come up here and present a case to say that people support these laws and that people are so happy with this. A, we tell you that the people who actually support these laws are the privileged people in society, right? Which are like the white old men, right? The very, very
privileged people, and B, we tell you that this actually inherently affects the marginalized, the minorities, the most vulnerable people, which I'll be going more into my third argument, right? Okay, and then they keep trying to talk about how people will learn that actions have consequences. We tell you that there already is a natural checks and balance system, as in if you're really sexist, the woman will not like you, right? That is the natural checks and balance system. So people understand that actions have consequences, but they do not care. But we think that this consequence inherently does nothing to deteriorate their hatred or like their actions, but oppositely just fuels it, right? Okay. And again, their point was that like on our side, people would just be getting arrested and to jail. Again, that is extremely symmetrical because on both sides of the house, even if we buy their point, you're also going to jail, right? And in an inherently worse place. And we tell you that most individuals will not be pressing charges in the first place because that's just so much more effort, so much more work. Like if someone calls you, like if someone says a racist slur to you, it is very unlikely that you'll go down to the courthouse and press charges on that individual, right? Okay, so moving on to the reconstruction of our cases. They keep trying to bring up how jail will not influence anyone, and then they try to bring up this example of murder, right? We tell you that murder is different because the inherent difference between murder and these hate crimes is that these crimes are fueled by inner hatred, right? And when you put a group of people who feel the exact same way, who all have this burning passion and hate for this group of people, that's what will ignite the fire, right? Because when you just put a bunch of murderers together, they all have different incentives, they all have different stories, they all have different motivations. But when you put a bunch of people who committed the same hate crime together, that is completely different because they all have this sense of hate, right? They all have this incentive to hate the people, right? Okay, and B, they keep trying to talk about how prison isn't overcrowded in the first place. We tell you that a lot of prisons are overcrowded, and this is an inherent issue in today's society. But B, if you don't buy this, we have to look at the long-term impact, right? We tell you that in the long term, these prisons will just be getting more overcrowded and more overcrowded as more people get arrested, right? Okay, and before I move on to my third argument, yes, was there that POI?
Yes. So according to you, since pressing criminal charges is such a long stretch and people won't bother to push any criminal charges, then that means that the person who committed, for example, racism can get away with it. Wouldn't that just fuel even more racism in the future?
Okay, we tell you that no. Okay, I don't think you understood our point, right? We tell you that even if we let them just live in society and just function as an individual on both sides of the house, their mindset will not change, right? Racist people are racist people, and it is very hard to change the fact that they are racist, right? And it's inherently true that on both sides of the house, you probably won't change that they're racist, right? But on your side, what is happening is that you're putting these individuals in places, in societies, in areas where there's so much more people that fuel that hatred, right? So much more people that are like, yeah, that's okay, right? At least if we keep them in society, there's gonna be some people that are like, no, what you're doing is not okay, and they will face some sort of natural checks and balance system, right? We're not saying that what they're doing is right. We're saying that it's not justified to just put them in prison where they will just have more hatred, more racism, more sexism, more whatsoever, right? Okay, moving on. Our third argument is about the most vulnerable stakeholders of this debate, right? We tell you that the most vulnerable stakeholders in this debate are people who are stigmatized in society already, right? So people people in low income communities, right? So we tell you that people from low income communities with mental health issues or people who are in poverty or even homeless are the most vulnerable stakeholders in this debate. Why? Because there already is pre-existing social stigma against these individuals and communities, right? So they're already vulnerable in society because of all this social stigma against them, right? So we tell you that these individuals are more prone to being victims of these laws, of getting arrested, of going to jail because of the stigma, right? Because think about it. If there's a drunk, white, attractive woman on the streets, like causing a scene or maybe just like singing or doing something that's disrupting the public, nobody will likely say anything around it, right? Nobody will call the cops and be like, yo, there's this like white, attractive, drunk woman on my street, right? But if there's a homeless man doing the same thing, it is very likely that people will call the police, people will report them, people will be like, okay, that guy is crazy, we need him to go to jail, right? Because they are already marginalized in society, because there's this social stigma against them, and they have this branding of image, which makes them more prone to being hated on, right? To looking more threatening. And we tell you the impact of this is that the marginalized will just become more marginalized, right? Because on your side, what is happening is that people who are already vulnerable, who already have this bad social stigma against them, even if they don't deserve it, are just going to be getting pushed more and more and more on, in the worst case scenario, be sent to jail, right? Which can obviously deteriorate their mental health, their physical health, their financial state, and everything, right? And we tell you, additionally, we're going to cause distrust between law enforcement and these minority communities. Why? Because they feel like they're getting punished for no reason, right? Because if you see that you go to jail for something that another person did and didn't get punished for, you're gonna feel like, okay, this system is broken, this is unfair, right? And all it's gonna do is further strain the relationship between law enforcement and these marginalized communities, which is bad for both because now the government does not have any connection to these marginalized people, cannot help them, and these marginalized people cannot be getting help, right? And we tell you that this is especially going to happen due to unfair reports and arrests due to this social stigma that I already characterized to you, right? Because once there is social stigma, which there is on both sides of the house, it is so much more likely that people are just going to be reporting them for no inherent reason, just because they feel like it, just because they hate them, right? Which is a hate crime within itself, but no one's going to say that, right? So let's do a quick comparative here, right? According to them, let's do a quick comparative of their world and our world. We tell you that their world looks like their world looks like there's overcrowding in jail. All these people are getting more hatred because they're fueling each other's hatred, and the marginalized get more marginalized, right? And according to them, our world looks like where people are mad because they supported like the people going to jail, and that there's no consequences to actions, right? We tell you that we still beat them on three main things. Number one, vulnerability. We tell you that on our side, at least we're helping the most vulnerable stakeholders. Number two, on scope, we tell you that it's so much more likely that even like the 5% of which rich white male who actually support this, we tell you that the rest of society is not, and that's why we beat them on scope, and we also beat them on effectiveness because it's on our side. It's so much more likely that these individuals will get some natural checks and balance system, and for those reasons, I've never been part of to propose. Thank you.
Hello, judges, and hello, opponents. Today, I will be starting with giving out a definition so that we don't get confused in the closing rounds, and then next I will be rebutting and giving our point and another point. First, the definitions between ASBOs, which is antisocial behaviors, that's what I'll be using throughout this whole speech, and also criminal charges. First, what is an ASBO? An ASBO is a legal measure to combat antisocial behavior by placing restrictions on individuals whose actions are disruptive or harmful to others. And that first, what is the key feature of an ASBO? ASBO is actually tailored to address specific behaviors that is being presented by a person. This includes prohibitions on activities such as littering, congregations in certain areas, or engaging in behaviors that disturb peace. For example, noise complaints. Second of all, ASBOs are civil orders, meaning they're not criminal convictions. This is the main difference between ASBOs and what they are presenting to you. This allows law enforcement to intervene without subjecting these individuals to more severe consequences of things like criminal prosecution and also criminal record. Next, what is criminal laws? First, criminal laws are explicitly defined as an action that is illegal, such as theft, assault, murder, fraud, drug trafficking, and other things like that. And that each crime typically has a corresponding punishment. And that criminal laws actually categorize offense into different classifications, which generally include things like felonies, misdemeanors, and also infractions. And infractions are just infractions is what they want to add these these 3 points. And basically felonies are serious crimes, misdemeanors are less serious crimes, but they also have jail, and then infractions are just mild violations. First, let me talk about why ASBOs actually should not be added into these law enforcement, and that this would actually not be rejecting the law enforcement. And first of all, without ASBOs, the police will have to just resort to criminal charges for disruptive yet non-criminal behaviors. For example, like noise complaints. A noise complaint, for example, a person is just playing loud music at night, and that someone just comes up, and the police just comes to your door and be like, "You're under arrest for a noise complaint." And that by escalating this to criminal prosecution for just minor nuances, first of all, it's not only proportionate, but also burdens both the criminal justice system and also the individuals that are involved. This can actually alienate a lot of these communities, especially within the youth and the marginalized groups, just because they are considered to be more considered to be in these minor offenses, or to be prone to committing these minor offenses, and that this would actually strain the relationships between the law enforcement and the public. Second of all, communities not only rely on the law enforcement, communities actually rely on the law enforcement to not only tackle these larger major crimes, but also to maintain, address, maintain order by addressing the small disruptive behaviors that degrade the quality of life. Now, by abolishing ASBOs, police will actually lose a mechanism for proactively trying to manage these issues, and the communities might feel like the law enforcement is just ignoring their own concerns, and that this damages the public's trust, which is critical when you come to a community where everyone has to work together. And then, lastly, ASBOs also allow these law enforcement to step in earlier to stop these antisocial behaviors from escalating more into severe criminal acts. Without ASBOs, police would just lose abilities to impose restrictions that prevent further harm. Thus, ASBOs is an essential preventive tool. Second of all, they also talk about how these ASBOs are not going to be included in law enforcement. And today I will be rebutting this point and how this would actually just escalate the community even more. First is actually ASBOs as the proportional response that law enforcement alone cannot replicate at all. First, they're tailored, as I said before, and that they don't meet the first, they are very tailored, and that traditional law enforcement typically focus on actions that are already defined as crime, where ASBOs allow authorities to impose restrictions on non-criminal but harmful behaviors like as I said before, noise, disturbances, loitering, harassment, not harassment, but also including things also things like swearing or vandalism. And that if ASBOs are now merged into a standard law enforcement, we actually lose the proportionality of ASBOs which they offer, which is why they were put in the first place. And that either law enforcement have to take no action on minor or antisocial behaviors, or just escalate to criminal charges, which are both really bad options. First of all, I will talk about this now. And first of all, the problem with this is that if you do escalate these into criminal charges, you're basically putting a large chain on a small dog. You're literally trying to people are trying to just put just going to be blowing up these small issues so that they can go to jail for like a year or two. And that's not really good, because a noise complaint and that leads to jail, that doesn't sound really nice, or that doesn't even sound at all logical to me. And that, second of all, if you don't do anything, which they're not doing right now, they're not gonna. The opposition side right now are currently not offering us this point. But however, if they do offer us this point, I'm just gonna say that this is going to be problematic for them too, because that's gonna just encourage more people to do a lot of these actions. Third of all, this would also be putting on an increased burden on the criminal justice system. Now that people have to be flooded with systems, this would be flooding the systems that are with cases that are minor yet disruptive. And that the criminal justice system's main reason why they're here is to solve bigger crimes, for example, bigger problems, for example, like murdering, for example, like for example, like murdering or theft. And this would actually just use up a lot of the valuable resources, and it will be overburdening both the court and the police. And that law enforcement have to spend more time on the procedures, paperwork, court processes for these small infractions that are diverting the resources from serious crimes that actually need to be solved. Lastly, I will be like comparing the ASBOs as criminal charges and ASBOs when they're not as criminal charges. First of all, this would be impacting on the justice and the proportionality, and that they will actually with these ASBOs, they're actually providing a good response towards these antisocial behaviors that disrupt the communities but don't rise to the level where there's a serious crime offense. And then without it, a law enforcement will just have to choose between ignoring a lot of these minor social behaviors or escalating them to criminal charges. This all or nothing would just result to over-criminalization, as people would just receive criminal records for relatively minor infractions, which would actually lead to life-altering problems, and that this would just not help the society at all. And for other reasons above, this is why we believe that we should this is why we propose.
It is morally incorrect to implement civil penalties for antisocial behavior on the grounds that it came from irrationality and can be altered with the correct education and with the correct treatment for a mental disease. Opening half so far has been focused very much on the pragmatics of the debate. For example, what are the overarching impacts of what harms or benefits these penalties are going to cause? However, we think the principle of why antisocial behavior orders are fundamentally and morally incorrect to implement is going to be even more essential to today's debate. If our extension can prove why this is true, then we will automatically win the debate. This is because if the justice system goes against people's morals, backlash will be the most urgent and the most severe in the long terms. Before I continue on with my speech, I'm first going to do some framing. And I have two pieces for this. Firstly, how do we characterize antisocial behavior? A, we think antisocial behavior only applies to harmful decisions that may be made in everyday life. For example, racist language, drinking too much, or vandalism of certain properties. This is to say that children and young people can also show signs of being antisocial. We just don't think it is charitable to our case if OP is going to characterize crimes in general as antisocial behavior. Therefore, for example, planning out a murder or something along the lines of that is not going to be considered to be antisocial behavior. But B, we think that antisocial behavior comes from certain experiences in the past. For example, it comes from family history. It comes from experiencing abuse and neglect. And that is why antisocial behavior is so prevalent in teenagers specifically. All we have to prove is that the majority of the antisocial people are caused by their experiences that they underwent or how they were raised, and that therapy and proper education is able to solve this issue. Secondly, our alternative is going to be sending these people to have proper treatment and sending the teenagers or like the students to other educational institutions to recover. Because we think that because this is a disease, it is something that can be treated, particularly for teenagers, which is a stakeholder we're going to focus on. We think that racist and sexist ideologies are able to be altered with the correct education. And this is because ideologies are only going to be built fully later in a person's life because people are apathetic when they are first born. If this is merely just a fabricated concept to begin with, then why can't it be changed in the future? We don't think that this is something that was acknowledged by either of the opening teams. Now I'm going to move on to rebuttals. Opposition says that there will be deterrence on their side for these certain wrong acts. I have a three-layered response to this. Firstly, I don't think that this deterrence is something that happens in the status quo. Because, for example, everyone knows that you're not supposed to drive when you're drunk, and yet it still happens. And that mainly comes from the fact that people are very irrational at certain times. But secondly, antisocial behavior is something that is simply uncontrollable because it is a mental disease. We think there's a clear distinction between swearing at someone and being antisocial because sure, you can control if you're going to swear at someone. You can control, for example, if you're going to use the right terms and the right words when you're talking to them when you're angry. But being antisocial means all of these things are going to be grouped together and they're going to become a mesh in your brain in which you're not able to control a lot of these acts that happen. So we don't understand why there is going to be deterrence for a mental disease on their side of the house. But thirdly, we don't think that this solves the root problem of these ideologies that people have, of this mental disease that people have. We think that education and therapy and treatment is just so much more important in the long term as opposed to these punishments. Now I'm going to explain my extension on why it is fundamentally and morally correct to find effective treatment for this disease. Firstly, why are civil penalties for antisocial behaviors morally wrong? I think A, it is very hard to decipher what is truly antisocial, right? Because if a person is seen drunk driving or vandalizing property, are they seen immediately as antisocial and given these specific civil penalties for this? We don't think that this was characterized in either of the opening teams. But B, we think that solely for the reason that being antisocial is a mental disease that you have, treatment should be something that comes right after it rather than punishment, because this is something that can be diagnosed in people no matter what their background is. For example, diseases such as depression or anxiety, OCD, and PTSD are seen as matters that can be effectively treated. And for these certain diseases, we're not going to be accusing the victims. We're not accusing the disease for having this. We think that being antisocial should also be associated with these diseases and should be given the same type of treatment and should be given like the same type of reaction towards this as well. Because the main reason is they all root from the same issue, which is that these people had very unfortunate circumstances within their background, or maybe they underwent certain traumas. We think that this is something that can be treated very effectively. But even if we want to focus on racist language, which opening half has tried to tell us is not something that can be changed easily, I think that with the correct education, this can be something that is effectively mitigated. A huge issue with OG's case that they explained to us is they did not understand, they did not explain why these antisocial people should be defended so fiercely, why they should not be put into jail, and why they should be defended as so. They say that these victims are going to be grouped together in prison. They're going to build more extreme ideologies, and they're going to rebel even more against the government or against other higher orders. I think I have a two-layered response as to why I don't think this is the most important impact in today's debate. Because A, what is going to be the extent of this? If this is seen happening, if all of these people are seen grouped together, if they're going to plan some other crime, they would just be forced to stay in prison. Or maybe after rehabilitation, if they are seen committing the same wrong acts, they're going to be punished again on their side of the house, on opposition side of the house, if OG wants to argue this. But B, we think this is a better defense for antisocial people on the principle level, and I will unpack why it is so principally wrong to be sending them to prison with a stakeholder analysis. I'm going to focus specifically on the stakeholder of teenagers because one of the reasons why antisocial behavior is so prevalent in society is that it develops from childhood and it's going to reach its peak in someone's teen years. At this time, these people are just extremely irrational, right? That is the key contributing factor as to why they are committing these detrimental acts. This is not to say why teenagers should not be punished by their school for doing these things. But why is this going to justify the civil penalties that go into it? These are people that have not even grown into adults. Their brains aren't even developed yet. So why shouldn't we allow them to recognize their mistakes? And why shouldn't we provide them the proper education and the treatment first before acting? Why do we think the stakeholders should be prioritized? I think that if a person reaches their middle ages, it is more likely they're going to see the consequences of their pernicious behaviors. Therefore, I think this debate should be focused on people that are more irrational and focused on people that will cause more harmful long-term impacts in the future. Very proud to stand on CG.
Okay, 3 things in my speech today. Firstly, I'd like to start with some rebuttals to what CG just provided, and secondly, I'll move on to a definition or a contextualize of what this debate is actually about, and thirdly I'll move on to my arguments as to why our side is better. Okay, so firstly, starting with rebuttals, CG argues that the principle of being moral is less important than the actual tangible impacts of these ASBs, but we believe that the tangible impact will always be the utmost priority, because is it truly moral to completely ignore any forms of consequences for these people who commit these harmful and dangerous acts that disrupt the safety, security, and peace of their communities? CG argues that these people just have some mentally issues, that they just have some form of depression or inner conflict that they need to get over with, which is why they propose therapy. But we believe that even if they have mental issues, it's okay to have mental issues and it's okay to send these people to therapy. But once they go to the level of committing these serious crimes, like vandalizing or committing these actions, sorry, not now. These actions in this community that disturbs other people and affects the other people, then it is where we cannot let this action continue further, and that is why we need to issue out ASBOs. So on our side of the house, we believe that prevention of these further disruptive behaviors is more important and is the first priority, and after that we can allow for other measures. Okay, so in about the context of antisocial behaviors, right now a lot of people think that ASBs are less deserving of political attention than other types of criminality, which is why there's this response of ASBOs, because they want to fundamentally resolve the question of social justice, about trying to rebalance the system so that it gives local authorities who are supposed to be protecting these communities the resources to be equipped to deal with it themselves, rather than taking every single case to court. So this approach in government was created because of a simple insight, which is that the criminal justice system, which has evolved around the principle of protecting the rights of the accused, is not equipped enough for dealing with all these instances of antisocial behavior. Because of course society wants to stop many of these ASB behaviors, such as aggressive drunkenness, drug dealing, vandalism, racist language, but although these have been long and criminal offenses, in theory, if each case were to be dealt with the long and treacherous criminal law process, then the police would have to bring a charge, the CPS prosecutes, and the court passes a sentence. But in that case, even if it seems like theoretically possible, it isn't what actually happens in practice, because in the real world, so-called like low-level crimes such as the ones that ASBs are created to like prevent these crimes are never prosecuted because the sheer weight of process required to secure a conviction means that it is just too not worth the hours and resources you need to spend. And that is why there has been so much like research, like there has been so much resources put into like developing these creating these ASBO policies, so that like it ensures that local agencies are now equipped with the new enforcement powers, and ensuring like there's intensive support available to the most troubled and chaotic families, and most importantly, guarantee that every community would have access to a neighborhood policing team that like safeguards this issue. Also about like why ASBOs were created in the first place. They were created as like a response to fears that traditional mechanisms for dealing with such like harmful behaviors such as like family, religion, and community have been weakened, which is why we now need like this like policy to ensure to further prevent this issue. Because although we don't think it can be taken to such a serious level like the CJS, like the court, we still think it needs to be recognized, and thus like recognized as like a civil offense, or like somewhere between a civil offense and a criminal offense, so that these people actually recognize like what they're doing is wrong and have to face actions for like what they did. Okay. Next, we believe that the fundamental argument for why we need ASBOs is because we need to have strong and secure communities, as they are the essential foundation for which individual potential is realized, quality of life is maximized, and other social and economic well-being is secured. But what makes a strong community isn't that complicated. It's just decent public services, welcoming physical environments, and perhaps most significantly, safety and the ability to live free from fear. But many of these things have been like eroded and undermined because of these like ASB actions, like vandalism, or like these other harmful actions, which is why it is like technically the government's like goal to like improve these areas that have been like weakened, that's like safety and security have been weakened. And that is why we need ASBOs to tackle these through visible and responsive local policing. And especially because ASBs have often been dismissed as a low-level crime and thus deserving of less like policy attention, and that is fundamentally mistaken, because ASB is often experienced less as a series of isolated incidents and more as a pattern of like repetitive behavior that intensifies over time, which causes misery and distress to its victims and the wider community, which is why we need these like fundamental prevention measures to ensure that it won't be left unchecked and spiral into a more serious crime. In short, a serious policy response to its manifestation would seem critical to any government seriously committed to improving quality of life and leveling up areas of the country previously left behind. Okay, now moving on to two more points to support what benefits ASBOs can provide. Firstly, they create like more community engagement and empowerment because they maintain these orders, and it empowers like residents to take an active role in addressing local issues, which means the impact of it is communities feel like without ASBOs, communities feel powerless to address these behaviors, leading to disengagement and like apathy, or maybe many citizens moving out. And the absence of this like formal mechanism for disruptive actions can result in more fear and decline in community cohesion, which is why we need ASBOs in place. And secondly, because it provides an opportunity for rehabilitation over therapy, which my second speaker will expand on. Thank you.
Opening half debate argues around superficial incentives. OG basically tells us how when people are grouped together in prison, it scares the victims even more. And OO tells us when we scare people, they won't commit in these actions. At CG, we analyze how these antisocial behaviors only reveals the underlying issues of society, which needs to be solved through education to completely solve the root of this problem. With this, I'm so proud to propose. Firstly, on our extension, we have mentioned three main points in our extension. Firstly, these behaviors and actions are often caused by experiences at a young age. Secondly, these behaviors cannot be prevented through deterrence because it is more like a mental disease than something that people are actively trying to do and trying to commit these crimes, etc. This is why we show that we need to give them the proper therapy and the proper education to actually ensure that they won't continue to do these actions. Thirdly, we prove to you how this shows an issue in society where these families and these people are not actually giving their children the proper education that we need to give them right now. With this, I think that I'll be going house by house to explain why our extension win over every other teams in this debate. Firstly, why is our extension unique from OG? OG mainly focus on the victims from these antisocial behaviors. They tell us three things. Firstly, when these people who committed antisocial behaviors are grouped together in prison, it is going to be worse as they can like group with each other and like team up and try to bully other people even more. Secondly, how victims will feel worse when they don't get to go through these major trials because this problem is actually just like identified and like only minor trials actually they only get minor trials. Thirdly, how victims that are originally stigmatized will more likely be reported and go to jail. Why is our case different then? I think the main difference between our case is that we focus on a new stakeholder in today's debate, which is the people who commit in these antisocial behaviors themselves. Why is our case better? I think there's two layers of analysis here. Firstly, in terms of the topic of our extension, we have three main reasons why our case is better. Firstly, we prove to you that the majority of the people who commit in these antisocial behaviors do this because of the experiences that shape them and cause them to do this. Secondly, we provide you an alternative of sending these people to therapy and education, and we explain why therapy will act as a better way to rehabilitate them and solve the underlying issue here. Thirdly, we then showed you how the likelihood of these people to commit in these antisocial behaviors again will decrease as their incentive is now gone when they have been rehabilitated and when they go through therapy and education of what is the correct way to show their anger and how do you manage these relationships with others. In terms of mechanisms, we're still able to outweigh OG's mechanisms because of two main reasons. Firstly, we explain the comparative. We explain how on their side, when people are only being scared and threatened to not commit in these actions, they simply cannot stop themselves. Or even if they do, this will only worsen the problem because all they're trying to do is to just hide themselves from the public. In comparison, although OG explains why on our side victims may be affected, they have not proved why, on their side, with no orders towards these activities at all, why is it that victims will only be harmed less? Secondly, we explained the exclusivity on our side. We explained that this type of change that solves the root of the problem can only occur on our side once they go through the proper education. They did not explain the exclusivity in OG, that why is it that out of prison, these people cannot find a place to get together, and only in prison they can get a platform where they can get together and start to bully other people, right? I think that they also lack explanation in the other cases that these behaviors can be found. For example, when a police checks each car on the road to check if anyone is drunk, it's not very like a discriminatory or selective process that actually only like harms the stigmatized people. Yes, your POI? Your POI? Oh, no POIs. Okay, then I'll be moving on to explaining why we're able to win over OO. I think the main argument that OO gave us is about deterrence and how with these orders in place, it only acts as deterrence so that people are scared to commit any actions. So what is the issue with this then? Firstly, we told you in our extension how these actions are caused by experiences that cannot be gone simply when they're scared or threatened that, oh, you're going to get punished when you commit in these actions. But secondly, these behaviors only signify the lack of education of how to correctly express their thoughts and their anger. So I think that the main issue with OO's point is how basically they think that this type of crime is the same as any other crime, just as like a murder or just like as when people try to harm each other. But this is not true as we have already proven in our extension, how this is really majorly caused by the experiences that shape these people and how education is the only thing and a key aspect that is missing from this. And this is why we need to actually give them this type of education. So I think that this is why we're able to win over OO, because they actually, their explanations are very much like towards these very shallow type of incentives and how, oh, as long as if we scare people, they'll stop doing these things. But this is simply not true, as we have already proven. Are there any POIs before 6? Yes, your POI.
Okay. So according to you, your logic, I believe you're saying that so let's look at it like this. Crimes can also be due to family background, could also be due to what has happened with them. Then if what you're saying is that if it's able to be fixed by education, then we shouldn't have any punishments. But does that mean that if someone committed a crime in prison, they still have habilitation? Why doesn't that mean that there's no crimes after?
So I think what you mean is basically that when people commit these crimes, we're saying that it's because of the lack of education, but like when they get to prison, they can still commit these crimes. But I think that this is not true because, as we already like explained to you, because it's caused by the lack of education, we're going to provide them with a therapy to solve that. So CEO told us that it's morally right to give attention to these type of crimes, and how when it's not solved, it actually causes more problems in society. I think that this is also pretty similar to OO's point, how basically deterrence is the method that we should use to prevent these crimes. However, I think that, as we already explained, this is not true. And I think that we're able to win over the opposition bench in general because we show you how only on our side we're able to solve this problem through the proper education that is actually lacking when these people commit these actions specifically. So with this, I'm so proud to propose.
So in this speech, I'll give reasons as to why we weigh over each team, including OG, OO, and CG. I'll give some rebuttals to all of them. I'll also give the main clashes in this debate and why we win all of them, and the comparative on the best case scenario in our world versus Proposition's world. So first, why we weigh over OG. They don't have an alternative solution or mech in any of their arguments. They talk about retribution, but these are minor crimes. And they also imply heavily that obviously these people, because of ASBOs, go to prison, which is a ridiculous assumption because the primary definition of ASBOs, as talked about in CG, is that they actually don't go to prison, and most of the times they actually just get these preventative measures. And basically, they don't give us an alternative solution for preventing any of these antisocial behavior. They just say why going to prison is bad, which is not a point. They don't give any alternative solution, and they don't talk about how this will improve on their world, which is why we win over OG. Now, OO says that this is a fundamental tool, that ASBOs are a fundamental tool to combat ASB, but they don't talk about, they don't mech it out either. Their arguments are very vague because they're just saying a fundamental tool. They don't say what specifically. They just say, we see an immediate reaction in antisocial behavior. There's no logical analysis here, and we provide that in the first speaker. They also talk about how people would feel more safe, and once again, they do not mech it out, or they don't explain why people would feel this way. And they talk about how ASBOs, they talk about how there are no overcrowded prisons, which we have to agree with OG on this one. There are actually overcrowded prisons, but this is a fundamental point that this is not because of ASBOs. It's because of all the other crimes being committed. It is nowhere near the amount of people committing ASBOs and going to prison is nowhere near the amount of people who are just committing normal crimes and going to prison. So the overcrowding of prisons is not because of ASBOs. Now, CG gives us the argument that the moral principle of helping these people who commit this antisocial behavior is more important than the tangible impact. But like my first speaker has said, we believe this tangible impact is much, much more important. And they basically say that their background of like traumatic experiences should be considered a mental disease and that they should get therapy instead. And I'll take down this argument part by part. First, they're basically implying that any traumatic experience or PTSD or bad past experience in their childhood would excuse your behavior. But no, because you are still committing these, I guess, they're not considered crimes, but you're still disturbing the public, you're still disturbing the peace, so you're still doing something that's immoral. So your background does not excuse your behavior. And they also refer to it repeatedly as a mental disease, but where do you get this definition? Antisocial behavior is not a mental disease and it cannot be grouped with depression or like anger issues like they have said. and they give us the alternative solution of therapy. However, we're saying that therapy alone cannot help. First, therapy has a lack of immediate accountability because relying solely on therapy fails to provide immediate accountability for these disruptive behaviors. ASBOs serve as a formal mechanism that establishes clear consequences for these actions that harm the community. While therapy can be beneficial for individuals, we can see to that, it does not directly address the immediate impact of their behavior on others. And without the structured accountability that ASBOs offer, individuals may continue to engage in these antisocial actions without facing any repercussions on prop side. There's also POI later. There's also a potential for ineffective outcomes because while therapy can help individuals, it's not a guaranteed solution for everyone. And some individuals may not engage with therapeutic interventions or may not see immediate results. And ASBOs actually provide this necessary framework to encourage individuals to seek help while holding them accountable for their actions. And therapy can be used for long term, but what we're saying is that without ASBOs, they have realistically no impact. Even if we give all the benefits of therapy to prop, they don't tell us why this can't happen on our side either, because this realistically still can be used with ASBOs on our side. So we also get all the benefits. And at best for proposition, it's a wash. And at worst, we have this preventative measure and rehabilitation. So I'll take the POI.
We are not saying these acts are going to be ignored. Our alternative is to send them to institutions and give them support while also reprimanding them for doing these wrong acts. So why are civil penalties the best punishment?
We already said we're not saying we shouldn't send them to these institutions, and we're not saying that they shouldn't go to therapy. We're saying you haven't actually told us why this can't happen on our side either. But we have this additional civil penalty of ASBOs, which allows for immediate accountability to make sure that they don't, I guess, commit these crimes right now, and then in the future, the therapy can solve that. So once again, you have not told us why this cannot happen on our side either, and so we get all your benefits as well. So on the main clashes, firstly, on the issue of community safety, we win this clash because we're able to show that ASBOs are essential tool for public order for therapy. However, we demonstrated that second, the clash of rehabilitation clash because we proved that ASBOs often do provide opportunities for rehabilitation rather than punishment. And proposition has claimed that ASBOs stigmatize individuals and do not address the root causes of their behavior. However, we highlighted that many ASBOs can include conditions that require individuals to engage in these support programs, such as counseling or substance abuse treatment, like they say. And on the final clash regarding the potential for increased tensions and societal division, we were able to demonstrate that proposition's case fails to adequately address the benefits of community cohesion, which is fostered by ASBOs, because we showed that ASBOs can enhance community trust in law enforcement and local governments by providing clear consequences for these disruptive behaviors. And this transparency cultivates a sense of security and collective responsibility among these residents and the community, which leads to stronger community ties rather than division. So in summary, the best case scenario for maintaining ASBOs leads to increased community cohesion, effective rehabilitation programs, and strong support for law enforcement. And conversely, the worst case scenario of abolishing ASBOs leads to increased community disorder, lack of rehabilitation options, and erosion of trust in authorities. Thank you.